Good morning all, I'm Marc Niemes here. We're about to start the webinar in the next 2 minutes, so I'm just checking that everyone's audio is working appropriately, and if not, you can use the telephone number, which I believe is in. Well, Marc Niemes here. Just want to check that the audio is all coming through to you loud and clear. On the right-hand side, you will see where you can raise your hand or ask questions, and if I can just check with you that that's coming through, that would be great. Cool. Thank you very much. By way of introduction, my name is Marc Niemes, and as you can see from the audio in the back, I've had to change rooms quickly because my boy is sick, so we're running this from home at the moment. But apart from that, welcome to our inaugural webinar, ACFI Post Budget Webinar, 5 Must-Dos Before July 1, 2016. So on behalf of HealthXN and Wellness&Lifestyle and LearningSeat, well, welcome to the webinar. So with people often ask what it is we actually sort of do in this space, and ostensibly we provide learning and risk management insights with a primary focus on health and care. On the right-hand side, you'll see a few different buttons that you can see. So hopefully right now you can see the slides, the front page of the slides. And you'll have a couple of options in there, sort of webcam, audio, video, and dashboard. So we've got a pretty full session today. We have quite a few questions that have been asked already as well. So what we'd like to do is get through it as quickly as possible in the 25 minutes. At the moment, your microphone has been muted. If there's an absolute pressing question, by all means, feel free to raise your hand and or type the question, and I can pipe in and actually ask that question. We have allowed quite a bit of time at the end, if necessary, for those of you that actually want to ask some questions from Michael to actually go through them in detail if needed. So what I'd like to do now if you are having problems with your audio, never work with children, animals, or technology. If you are having problems with any of those three, certainly at the moment we can help. There's a dial-in number that you can use on the right-hand side. There's one in the United States, and there's one actually in Sydney if you are trying, if your internet is providing different areas. Also, what I can do is I can effectively, I'll be turning the webcam off afterwards to keep the activity basically higher. So with that, I'd like to introduce our speaker today, Michael Peachey, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Wellness&Lifestyle. So for those of you who haven't heard of Wellness&Lifestyle, they're an aged care resource that supports operators in the care industry. Michael is a qualified physio with an MBA, and he's a graduate of the Royal Military College. He's also a member of ACS, Northern Territory Residential Aged Care Committee, and the Joanna Briggs Institute Aged Care Reference Group. But for today's purpose, he's actually one of the most experienced and leading experts in ACFI, having worked with over 150 care homes and care home groups on their implementations of ACFI, from single-site operators to very, very large operators. So with that, I would like to welcome Michael, and I think I've muted his microphone, so he might actually be saying something, but I can't actually, let me have a look here. Let me unmute his microphone. Are you there, Michael?
I'm indeed. Morning, Mark.
Good morning. So welcome. So what we'd like to do is one of the key slides that comes up as to what we're actually trying to achieve today, pretty simply, is to assist care operators with the knowledge to receive, hold on, let me just kill that out, to care operators with the knowledge to receive all of the funding they're eligible for, sustainably and risk-free. So I kind of say that again, is that it's about being able to effectively get all the funding that is due to your organizations, and what is it takes to actually get and achieve that funding, and through amalgamation of operational efficiency and clinical best practice. And we're very, very keenly focused on sustainability and risk. You may have seen some media reports in regards to there was a media report about some overclaiming. Our indication is that that's not the case in the industry at all. And what we really also want to focus on today is the areas that you actually can control. So it's all right. So obviously there are government and legislative changes happening from the 1st of July. So rather than focusing on the things that are outside of our locus of control, is to focus on the things that actually are within our areas of control. So with that, our experience is showing, this is one of the most credible stats we have, and Michael will expand on this, is our experience shows that 85% of care operators do not receive the funding they're entitled to. So there's not an incidence of overclaiming. There's actually a chronic incidence of underclaiming or not claiming all that's actually due to the organizations. And Michael will go through today, in one of the practical examples, we are talking about top 5 of the dozens of things that you could do. But in one of the examples we show in the to-dos, that in one metric alone, post-July 1, the average care home will be about 160 grand worse off by not implementing one of these strategies to basically make sure from a tracking perspective. And Michael will actually go through that with you today. So these are the sort of things, it's not only about the revenue you're not claiming, it's about the changes that are happening that will cause you to basically lose funding. So what I'd like to do is now give Michael control over the presentation and allow him to let's have a look here. Allow him to basically go and turn it off. Allow him to control the presentation. So Michael, you should be able to control. If not, then I can basically click through that for you. Michael, is there something you wanted to add?
No, that's all good, Mark. I think you touched on the key point that there are a lot of changes that are occurring, and one of the issues is that some of the changes we can't do anything about, whereas others we can actually do something about, or we can at least mitigate some of the risk.
Cool. So you have control of the slides, Michael, so feel free to jump through the slides.
Okay, I'm just trying to pull up the actual presentation. The presentation itself disappeared.
You should be able just to do it straight from the screen.
Can you see my screen?
No, you just jump into the webinar and you'll basically control mine.
I can't actually see the presentation, sorry, Mark.
You don't see the slides? Sorry.
No, it's just here.
Technology. Okay, so can everyone else...
I'll bring up a copy of the presentation. Just bear with me one moment, I'll just share my screen. Can everyone see the screen? Can you see that, Mark?
Yep.
Great.
Cool.
Excellent. So we'll talk about the three broad changes to the ACFI just to put things into context. So one of the issues was that the government has released essentially three different changes to the ACFI, and it's actually created a lot of confusion regarding what should providers do. It's created a lot of paralysis in some organisations, and it's created an unnecessary flurry of activity for other organisations. So we'll just briefly touch on each of the three just to put things into context. So the first change is the halving of the indexation to the complex healthcare funding. So rather than organisations receiving the full indexation across the board, which is estimated to be at 1.2% per annum for the next financial year, within the complex healthcare domain, that's only going to be 0.6%. Now that's actually something we can't do anything about, with the exception of change our budgets and our forecasts. The second change is the change that we're going to focus on most today, and that's the revision of the complex healthcare matrix. So we're going to talk about that in depth. But following that, there's also future changes to the way that the complex healthcare matrix is rated, and also changes to some of the technical requirements for some of the specific complex healthcare procedures. Now, they don't occur until the 1st of January next year. Having said that, though, the second change that we've mentioned there does actually have a flow-on impact unless we manage it properly. So in terms of the actual top 5 things that an organisation must do, and the first thing is to actually go out and conduct a funding gap analysis of your facility. So what do we mean by that? We need to essentially go out and identify across the board within our organisation if there's any gap between the care that we're currently providing and the funding we're eligible for compared to the funding we're actually currently getting. Now this might seem like a given because this should actually be an everyday requirement anyway. There should always be a system in place to tie the care planning process in with the funding claiming process. Every time a resident has a change in care needs, we should be trying to determine whether or not the amount of funding we're eligible for has also now changed. Having a look at the changes now as of the 1st of July, there's a couple of things that will change our focus. So if we look at a resident who is currently an A claim in medication and a C claim in complex health, today, if we submit their claim, it's going to lead to a medium level of funding. As you can see on the matrix on the screen there, in the red, that same resident, by submitting them next year, is going to be a low. Similarly, residents who have a D claim in medication and a C claim in complex health, submitting them today is going to be a high. Submitting them in the new financial year is going to be a medium. Now, a lot of organisations might be looking at, well, how much does that apply to my organisation? So that AC combination, that only represents 0.8% of the industry. But the key point is, if you only have one resident in your facility that's currently eligible for that claim now, if we don't get it in now, that represents a loss of $11,000 by just submitting it a little bit later. Similarly, that DC combination, there's actually 21.2% of the industry that have that specific combination. So that essentially means a $7,500 loss. So if we're looking at a typical 100-bed facility and they're averaging that DC combination over the next 3 years. If they all go from that high to medium, that's where we're talking about an effective decrease in funding of $160,000 per annum. So the first thing we need to do, the first action, is to complete that funding gap analysis. So the second priority that we need to do is actually prioritise those AC or DC submissions. And I'm not going to make a bad joke now about being thunderstruck or anything like that. I couldn't think of anything decent, so I'm just going to move on. I guess the key point here, though, is that a lot of organisations are thinking, wow, the ACFI changes are coming. We need to go out and resubmit everyone. So if you've got limited resources, you don't have enough staff to resubmit every resident straight away, it's important that we look at, well, which are the residents that we must submit today? If we look at a resident example, so John Citizen here, with that DC combination, submitting that resident today will get a high level of funding. Submitting that resident in a few weeks' time will be a medium, and submitting that resident next financial year, next year, will be a low. So even though we've got exactly the same resident with exactly the same care needs, by not prioritising our workload effectively and getting that guy in first, or that lady, we can have a difference in funding of a high to a low for the same care. And that represents a funding change of just over $18,000 per annum. So the key take home is, between now and June 30, we have to prioritise those AC, DC submissions. So the third thing we need to do is we need to prioritise those significant changes. So what do I mean by that? Well, sorry? I thought there was a question there. The next year's changes matter now. So if we have a resident who we've identified has a significant change in dependency, we can do a 2-category shift and resubmit their funding and get them up. So for example here, Joe Bloggs, we've increased his funding from a low to a high. By putting in a 4B, or whether or not that's the change or not, it is irrelevant. The key point is, if we put in a 2-category shift now, the expiry date, so when we do the mandatory reappraisal, falls in the second half of this calendar year. At the other end of the spectrum, Jane Doe, a resident with exactly the same care needs, if we don't get her mandatory her significant change in dependency voluntary reappraisal in now, if we get it in just after June 30, even though we might get the same category shift today, what it does mean though is we will now have to do a mandatory reappraisal 6 months later, and the expiry date will actually go into January 2017, where we'll be bound by the next sweep of business rules. So looking at this example here, we've got 2 residents with exactly the same clinical needs, exactly the same category shifts. If we submit them between now and June 30, they're going to go from low to a high. Submitting them after June 30, they're going to go from a low to a high. But if we then have to do a mandatory reappraisal 6 months later, one of them, their funding will actually go down. And if that 4B is in place, we're actually going to double the increase in time that's required to manage their 4B. So the key point here is, following on from those AC/DC appraisals, we also need to prioritise the significant changes in dependency. Okay, so the next thing we need to look at is we need to plan on submitting based on expiry dates, not submission dates. So what does this mean? If we use exactly the same example of Joe Bloggs and Jane Doe. Joe Bloggs, we've done his initial voluntary significant change in dependency reappraisal today, or 29th of June in this example. That means their expiry date is 29th of December. Whether we actually submit that claim on the 28th of December or even next year in January we're actually still going to be bound by this year's business rules. So it's not actually about when we submit the resident, it's about their expiry date. So we've got a lot of organisations who are saying, wow, we're going to get in all of those mandatory reappraisals that are due in July, and we'll do them in June so we can avoid this year's changes. But in reality, it's not actually going to impact it. If their ACFI is due July 2, whether you submit it August the 1st or June 29, it's still going to be exactly the same outcome. So getting back to the previous slides, if we've got limited resources, rather than trying to get all residents in, all your voluntary reappraisals, all the mandatory reappraisals to beat that June 30 deadline, we need to have a look at, well, what is actually the ACFI expiry date? And the big one is preparing for the new validation focus. So one of the key things with validation is it's actually about validating, does your claim match the resident's care needs? So there's been a few changes to the way validation has been occurring. And one of the key things is that the requirement for key staff to be on site to support the ACFI validation process is something now that we can no longer rely on. We've had examples of a key staff member, for example, the ACFI coordinator being on leave, an organisation having accreditation following the following week, and when facilities have tried to put their hand up and say, look, sorry, my key staff aren't going to be on site, the validation has still occurred anyway. So that means we can't rely on having packs that need to be talked to explain the content. Something else as well to be aware of is that desktop audits of palliative care claims are becoming widespread. It's like they're trying to do the entire industry. So if you have a palliative care claim in place, regardless of whether it was submitted 6 months ago or 5 years ago, expect a phone call to say, hey, please send in the ACFI appraisal pack by next Friday. The issue
Michael, have you seen that, Mark, here? Have you actually seen that happen a lot, or is that increasing, or that you're seeing that happen more as an agenda?
It's becoming commonplace where nearly every organisation I'm talking to has had that call. There's still some organisations that haven't heard of this, and the issue there, Mark, is that if you're asked to produce an ACFI pack from 2010, and in 2009 in some cases, finding that pack, finding all the supportive evidence can actually be sometimes difficult. Now the issue is if the resident was legitimately coming in with palliative care needs and they were literally looking like they're about to depart, you know, in one case we heard a resident who had pneumonia, they ceased all medications, they bounced back and they lived on for another 3 years, those claims are actually passing. But the issue is they're not just validating just a palliative care claim, they're validating the entire ACFI appraisal pack. So the feedback we've received is, yep, our palliative care claim held, but we couldn't find the evidence to support that claim in ADLs or behaviours or other complex healthcare interventions from that period of time. So palliative care claim might hold, losing funding elsewhere.
So it's not just a claim that's the problem, it's the actual documentation that substantiates the various aspects of that claim.
Absolutely. So there are a lot of cases where the palliative care claim has been downgraded because there's been a bit of confusion between what is palliative care versus a palliative approach. But it's also the other areas of the ACFI that are also getting downgraded. So what we need to do is, if you've got any residents in your organisation that you've claimed that directive for, you need to make sure that your pack is ready now to be able to send it to the department, because you need to expect that phone call. Now, okay. Another point as well is the department released something a few weeks ago, and it was just a gentle reminder to the industry that organisations have record-keeping requirements, and that is you must keep a resident's ACFI pack for 3 years after June 30 in the year that they departed your facility. So what does that mean? If you've got a resident who is deceased as of yesterday, you now have to keep that pack for 3 years as of this June 30. So the department is actually starting to validate deceased residents. So it's important that your record keeping is available, that you can actually produce those packs at short notice, and they're actually complete as well.
So, Michael, to see that happen, what are some really practical skills to actually see that happen? Is this just sort of moving now away from paper, or is this just saying, no, you just need to have a good system, whatever it is?
The key point there, Mark, is actually making sure that the people who do your ACFI appraisal packs are trained adequately to develop a pack that on its own can stand up to scrutiny. Because if you're now being requested to develop an ACFI pack that can be looked at in 2.5 years' time, even if you're still at the organisation as the ACFI coordinator, if you can't remember the resident and the reasoning behind why you claimed something, and you're relying on memory, that's creating an issue. So the ACFI pack itself needs to be validation ready in such a way that you could essentially give it to anyone else who doesn't know the resident, and there's going to be an accurate reflection of the resident's assessed needs at the time of appraisal without actually having any background information about the resident. So there's some practical changes that the department's doing in terms of how they're doing the validation process as a whole. But the next thing is the actual rollout of the validation process on site. And this is where training is essentially really, really important. Now, if we look at our little chap in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen there, what we're seeing is a bit of misconception about what the ACFI definition of physical assistance is, and we'd like to think it's just a misperception issue. And we're having residents where the ACFI appraisal pack is looking great, the I's are dotted, the T's are crossed, it's lovely, it's congruent, it paints a picture, it can be read like a book. The care plan says the same thing, but then when you go look at the resident, that says something different. For example, I was asked to do a second opinion for a facility recently where someone else had put together a pack, and the facility manager was saying, look, can you come and actually confirm what I'm about to claim is correct? So I was like, yep, no problems, can you tell me about Carol? And they was like, yep, that's the resident over there. In the residence meeting, I was able to see her walk, I was able to see her eat, just through the window in the nurse's station office, and everything was all good. But then when we actually looked at the pack and what was going to be claimed, a high was going to go in. And for those of you who know ACFI, that just seems ridiculous. And that was the case. But the problem is there was a number of packs like that in this facility where in the past they've done really well at validation, but now the validation emphasis has changed. The validators in some cases are turning up to a facility and saying, this is my list of residents. First thing, I want to go see them walk. I want to have a chat to them. They're going to go observe mealtime, observing administration of medications. So what that means is the validator is forming an opinion of the resident's care needs. They can see how the staff are interacting with that resident, and they're essentially able to do basic task assessments of the resident. So what that means is we're seeing packs that don't match residents, but the validators are now seeing that too. So what do we need to do? One of the key things is we need to prepare our staff. And I'm not just talking about the ACFI coordinators. The care staff on site all need training. They need training on what is the ACFI specific definitions of assistance. So if the care plan says this person is a physical assistance with mobility, that's the level of care they should be providing, because we'd like to think that is actually the assessed need for the resident. We also need to train the care staff some education about what is ACFI, what is the validation process, and how we should answer questions if we're asked about a resident's care needs. So training here is vitally important. So we should be educating the care staff what the care plan says. It's basically an instruction manual on how to look after that resident. And if you ask, how do you look after this resident? Well, then the answer is, I do exactly what's in the care plan because that's my job to do that. And if we do that, we're going to be set up for success. But the last point is the ACFI appraisal packs. The claim should reflect the assessments. It shouldn't be the assessments support the claim. So whoever's doing the ACFI pack now needs to understand the business rules to the depth that they can identify which are the residents with that AC-DC combination. They need to be able to prioritise those. They need to be able to understand which residents, if we do a 2-category shift for now, will have their funding locked in the second half of this year, rather than do it a little bit late and then go down in the future. And also we need to identify which residents, is it the expiry date or the submission date is important, based on whether it's a voluntary or a mandatory reappraisal. But then, when we're actually doing the ACFI appraisal packs, we need to make sure that every person who's putting pen to paper has an in-depth understanding of what is the ACFI definition of physical assistance. You know, what are the specific record-keeping requirements for each directive individually and for evidence as a whole. We need to understand record-keeping requirements if a resident passes away, and what actually constitutes palliative care and what is just a palliative approach. Because the key point is we can't rely on key staff being on site at a validation process, because if you get a call on a Friday and they say we're coming on Monday, which one of our clients had a couple of weeks ago, then we're going to fall apart.
Cool. Well, thank you, Michael. I mean, I guess the key thing that we're beginning to see is that it's not just, as you say, the key ACFI staff that need to be there. It's effectively everyone that's providing the frontline care. So, how do you actually do that? How do you actually reach those frontline care and multi-site operations if they're all running on different shifts, etc.? So it is quite an interesting scenario. So for those of you that have any questions, by all means, you have the questions tab on the right hand side. There's a couple that have come through, but just as we're basically summing up, the key things here, Michael, I think is sort of from takeaway, there are some areas that you can control. There are things that you do. You can control your documentation. You can do something about that. You can do ways to actually engage your staff. So there are things that are within your control, even as they change the funding models around you. One of the questions which I also talked about here is that the changes we also talked about will be ongoing. So even if the way you claim isn't changing, the amounts that you can claim for various areas themselves are actually changing. So you always need to be kept abreast of what that actually means. Even if you have clinical instruction for the carers on the front line, you need to know that you're actually claiming the right amount on top of changes to the way you actually claim. Something else we're actually seeing is that it's an active interface between care and operations. The two can't really be separated. As you said, if someone's there doing a care plan, yet the person doing the claim is not there until the following Monday, there is still need, the frontline staff still need to know their piece of the puzzle to make this actually work. And as you said, ACFI's knowledge is near at various levels. I think, Michael, are you seeing, what are you seeing frontline staff realistically going through around training in ACFI? What are you realistically seeing out there? What does an operator really do around that at the moment?
So the organisations that are performing better at ACFI, both in terms of the actual daily rates, but also sustainability of validation, they're providing different levels of training to different levels of staff. So it's segmented, and that's probably the most important thing. So at the very front line, if you're not providing training to the carers on what is the ACFI and getting them to buy into understanding what it's all about, but then basic training then on how to fill in documentations and charts, you know, reporting changes to residents' care needs every time they're doing something different than the care plan, and understanding how the care plan and following the care plan and reporting changes relates to the organisation having enough funding to put on more staff is vitally important. Then a different level of training is being provided to the clinical staff who do the actual assessments themselves. So if you've got staff who are specifically responsible for the ADL assessments, the cognitive assessments, or you've got your allied health staff who are responsible for doing mobility, it's just absolutely vital that they're all on the same page and where they're actually very conversant with the ACFI specific definitions and, you know, how to differentiate between what is a depressive sign and symptom versus a behaviour, for example. If you've got staff who don't have that depth of knowledge and they're doing those assessments, it's basically leaving money on the table for care you're already providing, but it's also creating validation risk. But then also as well, there needs to be a depth of understanding, so more than one person in every organisation who understands the business rules and when to do an ACFI pack. So an example I didn't mention was that in the new financial year, we might have a resident who's currently a medium in complex health. We think we're going to get them up in funding from a medium to a higher. Come next year, when we do a mandatory reappraisal, they may actually drop down from a high back to a low. So not only is that an effective decrease in funding of $18,000, but it also means that the facility is actually $10,000 a year worse off than what they started because the resident care needs have changed. So understanding that care needs and an increase in care needs can sometimes lead to a decrease in funding now, that's the sort of depth of information that, you know, providers who are actually savvy are providing their staff, and more than one person as well. I guess one of the key things as well, it needs to be consistent. If you've got 3, 4, 5, 10, 30 facilities, they all need to be on the same page and having a consistent approach to ACFI as well. So whatever training is being delivered, it has to be consistent.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Michael. I guess as you can see, there it is quite a complex area that's changing. But what we are seeing from care operators is it's how they're funded, and that you can't separate effectively better clinical and care practice and funding, that the two actually work hand in hand. We've got a couple of questions from the group if you've got time to sort of go through them, and thank you all for attending there's a copy of this particular presentation. You can see on the right hand side you should have a link to handouts, and in the handouts you'll see there's a copy of all the available courseware around ACFI that you can actually subscribe to. I'll also send you an email link with this live recording, so for those of you, there are a couple of people that came in a little bit later with the audio, we'll make sure that you get a copy of that recording, and this will also be transcribed. So there's a couple of specific questions. In reality, how many changes can we anticipate to ACFI over the next 3 years, and is it going to be a political football?
So, great question. In terms of how many changes can we expect to see, look, that one I would have to take an educated guess. One of the key points is that the department didn't instigate these changes. These changes were instigated by Treasury. So Treasury has essentially said, hey guys, you need to save X amount of dollars, make a change. So what we're going to have to look at, and looking forward into the future, we've got a decreasing taxpayer base, more people are retiring out of the workforce, and then those certain people who are retiring no longer providing tax are now actually going to be requiring care that's subsidised from the government. So what that basically means is, looking at forward estimates, the government's thinking, wow, we need to start trimming down our expenses, so we need to make changes. So I wouldn't say definitely this isn't the last of the changes. In terms of it being a political football, absolutely. These changes were released just before the government went into caretaker mode. The Labor government has already said that they'll undertake a review of the aged care industry, but they've also said we're not in a position to actually not save the $1.1 billion. Regardless of where it comes from, that saving still needs to occur. The key point is, if we look at the changes, optimise the fact that there's a grandparenting situation in place, you're going to be less impacted than other organisations. Organisations who are asleep at the wheel are going to struggle to be sustainable in the long term.
So Michael, I guess the obvious question is, if in your experience, having gone to these over 130 odd care facilities, is it in your experience possible to negate most, if not all, of the changes through an effective ACFI regime, through better record keeping? Or does it depend on how bad it's being done at the moment?
Look, one of the key points with optimising an organisation's ACFI is it's actually not that difficult a process. By coming in and doing that gap analysis and identifying who are all the residents that we're currently not getting all the funding we're eligible for, based on the care we're already providing, if you have 30 residents who are suitable for reappraisal, that should be 30 business days worth of work. And once you've got up to that level and it's just a matter of tying the ACFI evaluation process into the care plan evaluation process. Sustaining that is actually a relatively straightforward process.
Yeah, so what we've... Yeah, so yeah, it does. So when there's a couple more questions here. This is quite a specific one, so I'll read it quite slowly. And I've also posted it to you, Michael, in your chats down the right-hand side. Just want to clarify about MCR, major change reappraisal. If we submit MCR 1 month before it is expiring on the 2nd of July 2016, we have calculated a classification 1 based on current business rules. Will Medicare automatically change the classification, or do we have to wait until after June 2016?
Okay, so it's all about the expiry date. So it is expiring on the 2nd of July,
yep,
which means that they're going to be bound by the new business rules. So whether you submit it 1 month before in June, or whether you submit it 1 month after, early August, the 1st of August, the classification will take effect as of the 2nd of July. So if it's that DC combination, unfortunately, we've got a scenario where a resident they're currently getting high. Whether you submit it in June or not, it's going to go down to a medium.
Okay. One other question is, realistically, if I have 350 beds organisation across 10 separate facilities, if there were things that, how do I get managers to understand the importance? I would have thought you would just tell them. I'm sorry, it's just a half question here. I would have thought that you just tell them that your funding is at risk, or how much funding is being lost through inappropriate ACFI.
I guess one of the key things here, Mark, is that because there's the industry averages, so the 100-bed facility average would be $159,000 worse off. A lot of people think, well, that's the average, I'm not average. So until you actually talk to people in practical terms and give them resident-specific examples they can identify with and say, hey, for this one resident, you're going to be losing $18,000, or in this one resident, you could save that $18,000. Until you get down to that granular level, a lot of organisational managers just aren't recognising the severity of the impact. We've come across some organisations where, 60-bed facilities, where literally half of the residents would be impacted over the next 3 years if they replace like with like. But also you can get down to a depth of analysis by identifying which are the residents in the organisation who are going to be impacted by mandatory change reappraisals, and you can say, look, I can absolutely guarantee if this resident doesn't change, you will actually be losing about $30,000. That equates to FTE and staff time. So when you start speaking in specific terms, by giving them, I guess, more scalable education to get everyone on the same page as quickly as possible, that's what's important. Because we've got to recognise there's only 4 weeks to take action.
Okay. We've got another very specific question here. If we had submitted an ACFI claiming for 12.14 palliative care as HHH says 2 years ago, can we resubmit as CNR by fixing our CHC claim?
So, sorry, can you repeat that one?
If we had submitted an ACFI claiming for 12.14, so I'm assuming that says December of 2014, yeah. Palliative care as HHH says 2 years ago, can we resubmit as CNR by fixing our CHC claim?
If there's a change in care need and you can do a reappraisal 12 months post voluntary appraisal, you can resubmit that.
Okay. Cool. So that's basically all the questions. If anyone has any other questions, I'm happy to unmute microphones so that you can call if you raise your hand, or if you'd like to send more text-based questions, you can do so in the panel on the right. I guess with that, if you had to choose a strategy in the next 90 days, Michael, what would they be?
I guess the key thing was rolling out education as quick as possible to all of your staff is vitally important. There's a massive push at the moment on validation, on desktop auditing, on observing the residents rather than focusing on the actual packs. But also as well, there's a lot of changes that are taking place where if we don't take action now, the long-term effect is going to be significant. So educating as many staff as possible in the shortest period of time is probably the priority.
Okay. Well, thank you all. We try to keep people as close to time as possible. So thank you. We've had quite a few questions from various places around Australia. We have 4 or 5 people from overseas in Southeast Asia. The copy of this presentation I will email to you all at the conclusion of this presentation, and the audio recording, including the questions, will be available as a audio-video file as well. Without further ado, you'll see that you have some contact details on the screen there. The organisations, we're very, very keen to make sure that we enable the best possible knowledge around ACFI get into the right hands of people. And you'll see if you hit learningseat.com in the care tab, you'll see all of the titles and content that's available to actually get ACFI into the hands of people that need it in various stages within care homes. And our analysis of the market at the moment is that the care industry is completely and utterly underrepresented in the needs and the needs around knowledge and knowledge capture. So we're very proud to be able to bring this type of content to you and get that into the hands of the people that actually need it at both the front line and operationally speaking. And having looked at the care markets around the world, Michael, something I share with you is that there is a skilling crisis in this industry. It's a bit of a slow train wreck, but the size needs to at least double in the next 15 years as far as carers, and the workloads are not going to decrease; they're only going to increase. So the efficiency of what's going on in that industry is only going to be more and more in demand. So thank you very, very much for your time. By all means, I'll reach out to you that have attended and those that couldn't attend with copies. And without further ado, if there's no other questions, I'm happy to close the session. And thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah.